So good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo kicking off a Monday, and this is business as usual. I'm President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council, joined by Jonathan Kirsting. He's Vice President of all things media and marketing at the Tech Council. And thanks to Brian Kennedy for being our executive producer and making sure that we have great guests. And today is no exception. But before we jump into today's guest, who I've known for quite a while, I just want to thank Huntington Bank. I want to thank them for believing in us right from the onset of COVID and working with us as we experiment and pivot and make sure that we're connecting the community. The reason why we do today and every day is because our intent is to make sure that the tech ecosystem is connected and that there's opportunities for some pathways because, you know, the show must go on, business must go on, and connections must happen. In addition to that, we really have an opportunity to talk to most of the rock stars that are in this region, and today is no exception. And so if you don't know anything about Huntington Bank, they did help us through the pandemic. They helped many small businesses. They were really involved in making sure that the support is there. If you don't know them, get to know them. We have a chat. The chat is going to allow you to ask some questions. Hopefully we'll have time with Mark to be able to have some questions answered. This is considered a casual exchange. So we want to make sure that we have an opportunity for engagement. And then we've muted your microphone. So that way we don't have to hear everything in the background. However, just full disclaimer, if you hear dogs in the background on mine, you'll know that I didn't mute my microphone. We have a great week ahead. We also have tomorrow, we have the project lead of the circular economy at Covestro. We also have the CEO of Rivers Agile. On Wednesday, Thursday, we have Deb Acklin, President and CEO of QED Multimedia. They've won a bunch of Emmys, lots of things to talk about. And Friday, with Finch Fulton, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Transportation Policy for the U.S. Department of Transportation. So busy, packed week, but I want to jump right in because I'm very excited to talk to someone who I think of as a friend, as a colleague, and someone who's really worked hard to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem, as well as his role in teaching students over at Carnegie Mellon. So this is Mark DeSantis. He's now the CEO of Bloomfield Robotics. As I mentioned, I've known Mark for many years and in many capacities. He's easiest described, and Mark, you can tell me whether this is right, as a serial entrepreneur, but your interests and your experience really are wide and deep. So from everything from early onset of doing radio, as well as your interest in public policy, I don't think there's anything that you haven't touched. You know, you're adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon in the College of Engineering. You are the chair of the board of Allies for Children. And before his life in academia, I mentioned that he was active in public policy. He actually worked for Senator John Hines and as an analyst in the White House Office of Science and Technology and Policy. So he's done a lot of things. And he has a lot of opinions, but really what matters today is we're going to talk about his work in robotics. So Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for that great I'll have to record that and send it to my mother. My mother would be very proud of me to hear that.
Well, listen, it is recorded. So just so you know, it is recorded. So hopefully she's proud of you.
Yeah.
And then she can give me a little bit of a kickback, okay? So really appreciate that. So Mark, today, believe it or not, we just kicked off our fall STEM Summit, which reaches about 400 plus teachers and students who are registered from around 250 schools and organizations in southwestern Pennsylvania. So as I mentioned, you're currently serving as the chair of Allies for Children. So
I'm just on the board now. I'm just on the board.
Oh, okay. So can you talk about that organization really quick?
Sure. So, it's an organization that's dedicated to supporting the development of children who in the community that are not reached by public entities. You know, nonprofits, the point of a nonprofit, right, is to fill that gap where private and government don't fill the void. Mm-hmm. And so this organization was created to fill that gap, and those gaps, and it's doing a great job, and it's a great team, and Pittsburgh is, it stands out as kind of a place where people take care of one another one way or another, and try to help one another. And this organization was really designed to kind of augment what are really public resources. And I think it's a good model for other sorts of organizations around the country, actually.
Well, then maybe share a little bit about your own early days and the influences in your own life, because I think that really has shaped a lot in terms of your career, like in entrepreneurship, public policy.
So my earliest memory actually of being kind of interested in maybe what I do now, which is tech type stuff, goes back to when I was a kid. I actually was born here in Pittsburgh, but I grew up in Sharpsville, up where people know in Mercer County, hour and a half north of here. And I remember I think I was in maybe 5th grade, and we went on a road trip to Pittsburgh. We went to the museum, and in the museum, there were these models of machines and all sorts of crazy things, catapults and bridges and all that, made designed by Leonardo da Vinci. And they had built these models of all these different ideas, wooden models that Leonardo da Vinci had. And I remember being heavily influenced. I still have a vivid memory of seeing those and thinking, this guy lived 500 years ago. And many of these things were just centuries ahead of their times. And from that moment forward, I was always interested in technology. I never became a technologist, but I've always been involved in it in some capacity, whether it's in a policy sense in my way back when I was in Washington, or now in starting companies. So I have a lot of respect for people that, engineers and software engineers and developers and scientists and people that make things and invent things. I have a lot of respect for them. And I guess you could say my career has been around trying to create an environment to help bring that about. So for me, that's what entrepreneurship's all about.
Well, now at Bloomfield Robotics, it's another great spin out from Carnegie Mellon, the technology. Yeah. It's bringing artificial intelligence into the agricultural market. I've seen some great pictures of you out in fields and doing things that I probably never saw pictures of you before. But you have these two products, Blink and the Flash, and you're already working in 2 key industries, right? Cannabis, winemaking.
I can tell you.
Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Little known fact about Carnegie Mellon, among the many things, is that Carnegie Mellon's been in ag tech for a long time, for decades. People think of robots, they think of military applications, autonomous vehicles, and a variety of other things CMU is, of course, well known for. But little known fact is the ag tech work that has been going on for years. And a guy named George Cantor, Dr. George Cantor, who's a research professor there, came up with the idea of taking the perception piece, the ability to sort of look at stuff, and carving that out as a service. So if you go back, the agriculture is a, 10,000 year, it's, Mesopotamia, 10,000 years ago, they were growing crops. And from that time forward, crop inspection is largely a human activity. Somebody goes out among the fields and looks at the crops and then renders a judgment. Ideally, those people are well trained to do that. Now you have drones. Drones came on the scene in ag tech, where you have drones flying over crops, looking down, and they too are looking at the crops. And they're looking for all the things that individual is looking for. And typically, these are agronomists, botanists, horticulturalists, viticulturalists, looking for things that tell you the condition of the crop, if something bad is happening, when to harvest, what the yield is going to be. That's a big issue, predicting yield. But these guys, with George and Tim Muller-Sim, who was a grad student of his, both of whom are now founders, said, as we carve out the perception piece, let's use cameras. We'll take pictures of the plants, and then we'll use AI to look at those pictures, to look for all the things that those horticulturalists, botanists, and agronomists look for. And thus the idea was born. And that was about a year and a half ago. when the company was founded. I came on about a year ago, and they said, Mark, you know, when I met them, they said, we take pictures of plants and we use those pictures to determine the health condition of the plant. And I was hooked. It took me about 15 seconds to say, yeah, I want to do that. We are in, we're crop agnostic. That's a phrase I never thought I'd ever use in my life.
Never heard of that.
Never imagined I would ever say I'm crop agnostic, but I am. But effectively, we don't care what kind of plant we look at, but we have focused and specialized right now because of where the opportunities are. And the big one is in grapes. So we have our cameras, two types of cameras. One is a handheld device where you look up close, but the primary product we have, the service, is rendered through a camera about yay big. I can show pictures if the audience is interested. And it has a stereo camera, so you're actually using two lenses. Has its own light source, and then it images 5 frames a second, and you just pass the camera in front of the plants. In our case, vineyards is our focus. And so these cameras often sit on tops of tractors, ATVs, anything that moves, and you just pass it in front of the plant, snaps away, and those pictures are then analyzed on the device and in the cloud, and we look for all the things that a vitirologist, viticulturalist would look for, and grape size, density, grape cluster, leaf, you name it. We are in a dozen vineyards in 4 states. We're in several in New York, 4 in Washington State, 1 in Oregon, several in California. These are paying customers. We are also about to go into 2 vineyards in France. 2 very large vineyards you've heard of. And we're looking at 1 in maybe Chile. So pretty exciting. I never thought I'd be in the wine industry, but you know, we're deep into it, you know, so, you know, it's how crazy the world works.
Got some perks? You're getting some perks?
Not yet, but I'll be, you know, we can't fly to France, but we have a guy there in France who we're working with, who is our sort of person on the ground,
sure, who
comes from that industry. We have a person in Washington State, Will Bechtel, who we work with, who's our person in the West Coast. So COVID has limited our ability to travel, but fortunately we have people that we're working with to be the pointy, to do the business end of what we do. It's exciting. Just a statistic your audience should be aware of. So the population of the world's about 7 billion. They're expected to add another 3 billion in the next 30 years. In the next 30 years, the world will need to grow more food than has been grown in human history in the next 30 years. And it'll have to be on the same arable land. In fact, probably less. And so you're basically saying, how do we get that crop load on the land we have now? And that's the challenge. I got a question. How should I answer the questions as I get them? Or?
Jonathan can just prompt it, but if you read it, you can answer it right now.
Yeah. So, sir, can we see diseases and viruses? Yep, it's called integrated pest management. So when we look at a plant, we look at health and we look at performance. Health relates to the things that determine whether or not the plant's going to survive. So we look for integrated pest management, disease, water stresses, all the things that a visual observation would reveal, we can also see. So if the person can see it, we can see it. And if they can identify it, we can identify it as well. In fact, we have a partnership in that regard with Cornell University. Cornell has one of the premier viticulture programs in the world. They also have one of the largest, I guess a better way of saying it is infested vineyards. So they intentionally infest a variety of grapes with all these different diseases, and then they manifest visually. And then our cameras can see it, and then we can render a judgment about that plant. And some of these diseases are pretty exotic, so they don't often show up. And the way AI works is you have to be able to see it to know, you have to be able to see it, train it, and then see it again. So we have a great partnership there. So think of that as health. And then performance is, hey, this cluster should be this big, the grape should be this dark at this time of the year. Right now we're in something called Veraison. And so we have table grapes as well. Some of our customers are table grape customers as well as vine grapes. We build our own cameras, you know, these cameras, you can't buy them. So we're not really in the business of being into hardware experts, but the fact is you can't buy these cameras to allow the AI work. So for the time being, we're making them and hope to be outsourcing that. In fact, somebody asked about Washington State. I'm actually speaking at a conference at Washington State, a virtual conference here soon. The fires have had a severe impact on our customers all the way up the coast, from Washington on down to California. So, you know, there's people always say, hey, when I had this cab, it had a smoky flavor. Well, this is a little bit too much of a smoky flavor, if you will. So this is not the kind of smoky flavor people want. Yeah. Also, there's heavy metals and other things in that. So it may, in many cases, completely obliterate the crops for vineyards.
Wow. So what about on the marijuana side of the house?
Yeah. It's interesting you asked about that particular interest you have in that.
I have a deep interest in that. Everyone who knows me knows I have a deep interest in that.
Somebody said, they say, hey, Mark, you're in wine and cannabis. And I was going to say, well, we could, you know, slot machines would be another one we could add. But so cannabis, we have cannabis customers. We have cannabis customers in Oregon, Canada, and the Netherlands, actually, with a very large company, a gigantic company in the Netherlands that makes equipment for indoor grows. The handheld device is the one we use, that we use in cannabis, which basically, this is 10 times more than your audience wants to know, but we use something called a liquid lens. And so if you're taking a picture of a three-dimensional object, typically you're getting one focal plane. So anything beyond that focal plane or in front of it's a little out of focus. For a standard picture like a cell phone, we can't see that. But if we're taking every pixel, like our AI is, it's out of focus. So this liquid lens, believe it or not, snaps multiple focal planes at the same time. And so this handheld device, you can put it up to a cannabis leaf and you can see the trichomes, which are like the little hairs where all the good stuff is.
Oh, the good side. I like that technical definition there. That's awesome. You can see there's a couple of other questions here.
Yeah, I saw one.
Want to manage
mobile sensors, airborne, hyperspectral. So my first company, which I made $6,000 on 12 years ago, was we would take hyperspectral cameras and put them into the belly of a Cessna, and then they would fly over a crop field. The challenge with using any kind of camera that's looking down on a crop is you can't see the meaningful stuff, particularly for specialty crops. So just to differentiate, so if you took all the crops in the world, about 30% fall into the category of specialty crops. The simple way I would define that is anything you can buy in Whole Foods plus cannabis and grapes and some other things and flowers and so on. You have to be able to see those, which means you have to get perpendicular to the plant. You can't see apples, cherries, grapes from the air. You have to get boots on the ground, so to speak. So, so there'll be a place for hyperspectral cameras and other airborne sensing. Plenty of use there, lots of big market, multi-billion-dollar market. But this emerging market of getting up and close, personal to the plant is new. We have tests going on in two apple orchards in Washington State, two of the largest apple growers in North America. We're about to do a deployment with one of the largest apple growers in the UK. These are experiments, tests, pilots. So we're getting into other crop verticals. And that's exciting. And for many of these crops, you have to get on the ground and kind of look at it.
Mm-hmm. So you have a couple of more questions, right?
Yeah. So we've got, let's see, it's next step, sample of crop and analyze grapes. It's a machine with camera travels through the vineyard. Yeah. So there's we were featured in Good Fruit Growers magazine. Again, another phrase I never thought I would ever use. But effectively, you basically put a camera on a ATV. I've even talked to an ATV manufacturer, reached out to us, that's trying to get into the ag market, and he's put one of these guys on the ATV. You can go 20 miles an hour. It's hard to do that in a vineyard, but you can go pretty fast and get a lot of data very fast. The entry point for our technology is the specialty crops, where the revenue per acre is much higher. Like a typical corn, you might generate $600 an acre. In a high-end grape vineyard or tomato grow, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars per acre. So you want to be where the expense is not substantial and the demand is quite high.
Mm-hmm. And so what about clients in Pennsylvania?
We don't have any yet, and it's not for lack of trying. It's just that we push on open doors. And so we got inbounds from New York State, 3 vineyards there, 4 in Washington State, and several, like in Oregon and California. We're adding more. We're adding another one, a big one of the oldest state vineyards in the United States as a customer. Some of the customers are very well known. They're tier 1, like in the 2 in France are considered they're world famous vineyards. So they have a very high interest. Hops. Yep, we've done hops. We are working with some folks to see what the opportunity is there. And I got an inbound from Jack. Crop yield management. So one of the challenges is maximizing yield, but there's another issue with quality. So you want to just not have as much yield as possible. It has to meet a certain quality standard. And little known fact, but much I've learned about vineyards. I always thought, they go and they pick the grapes, good to go. The grapes are ready, go pick the grapes. And it doesn't work like that. They actually pick the grapes at different times. So they take grapes when they're ready. And for some of these vineyards, it is high science. It is a very sophisticated operation as to which grapes are harvested at what time, even off of the same vine. And so the beautiful thing about our technology is when we look at a plant, we're actually geolocating that plant. So I have a motto, sounds corny. Again, I'll say this one more time and then that's it. But I never thought I'd say this. Every plant matters, right? Every plant matters. But for us, every plant matters. So literally, we look at every plant, we geolocate it, and so we follow that plant through its life. So we know that that's vine 5, row 7. And believe it or not, for these vineyards, these individual vines are tracked. Now, there's an interesting phenomenon that's happening in the ag, and that is that chain of custody. So crazy as this sounds, there'll be a day, not unlike when you buy an appliance. There'll be a day when you can determine who touched that tomato, specifically where that tomato came from, perhaps even to the individual plant, believe it or not, and track it through its life. Believe it or not, that's going to happen. So the level of sophistication is growing. We are part of a phenomenon that's been around for 30 years called precision agriculture. And precision agriculture is the idea that I closely measure all the stuff that goes into a farm, into a grow. And then I manipulate those depending on what I'm trying to get out of it. And then from the time the crop is harvested forward, I track its health. But for many farmers, the what happens in the grow from seed to harvest is still a little bit murky. That's where crop inspection comes in. This takes crop inspection to a level of precision that's unprecedented. So this is particularly keen for like indoor grows. So you see a lot of that now. We're talking to two very large indoor grows right now.
So let me ask you something. You get like this incredible amount of data that you're extracting and you're collecting.
Yeah.
And your sensors are going nonstop. And the volume of data is probably just insane. How do you see 5G in terms of enabling this? Is this required?
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, this is a great question, Audrey. This is a great question. So the genius, George and Tim are very smart, and another fellow named Hargeton, very smart. And what they said is, look, farms don't have big, thick Wi-Fi pipes, so we can't just upload an exabyte, exa. So what they said is the cameras have to be as close to pure IoT kind of device as possible. So a lot of that data is processed on the machine. So our cameras are actually have a great deal of processing power. And so they thin out the data load. And so a very thin stream of data goes up to the cloud. So we don't assume anything about the farmer having some 5G connection. Now, I think 5G is important. Two technologies I'll make in my extensive 1 year career in ag tech, with my vast experience of 1 year in ag tech. I'll make two comments. There have been waves of ag tech hope and disappointment starting 30 years ago, and particularly robotization of farms. And there have been enthusiasm, disappointment, enthusiasm, disappointment. I think this time it's going to stick. And the reason is AI finally works in a way that no one could have imagined even 5 years ago. The perception piece in particular, and 5G. Mm-hmm. Those two things together make possible the dream of a vastly more automated farm with much higher yields and much higher quality. It's not going to eliminate the farmer by any means. Farmers are under immense pressure. It's a tough business with thin margins. And there's a culture of hard work and commitment that you just see it in every farmer's eyes. They love what they do. They're committed to what they do. But they need tools to allow them to make money. Most agriculture in this country is subsidized to the tune of about $25 billion a year. We have cheap food because we as taxpayers are willing to fund that. That's why we have such inexpensive food. We pay tax money to go in to subsidize that. So there are very thin margins. Farmers need help. And these tools change the formula for a lot of move farmers from being unprofitable, ideally someday to profitable. So they're going to augment the farmer, but hardly eliminate the farmer.
So you have a couple of more questions. We're coming to our 30 minutes, but there are some really great questions out here. Is there one you want to grab?
I particularly like the STEM question. There's some organizations we're working with to try to encourage people to think of farming in a new way. So my previous company, as you know, Robotics, great company using similar technology to assess road surfaces. They had a similar challenge with respect to STEM, in that that technology will and is changing civil engineering, at least road engineering, by taking AI and allowing people who are managers of road networks and road surfaces to be more effective. It's the same in this business. This AI is not replacing the farmer or the crop inspector. It's augmenting the ability of that farmer and crop inspector to do something they've never done before. What that means is anybody who's going to be an agronomist or a farmer or go into that profession has to have science, computer science, and tech and information technology skills. They have to have it. There is probably not a profession around, not a inspection profession around that doesn't require some computer science and information technology skills, mainly because AI is creeping into every discipline, every inspection regime you can think of.
So just one last question out of curiosity, because I don't know the answer to this. How did they come up with the name Bloomfield?
Does anybody want to speculate?
I know the answer to that one.
Yeah. Okay.
So started in Bloomfield. That's what they told me.
Okay.
Audrey, we interviewed the two founders a few eons ago, and it was all about
clever play on words. So it's
play on words. I get it.
Yeah.
So Mark.
Yeah, no, it's fun.
We've had a lot of questions here. Will you, if people are interested, can they reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. By all means. Yeah.
There's a lot of things here that people have brought up, Mark, that I think are ways that we all need to be helpful. Is one, you don't have any presence in doing any of this work across Pennsylvania. And when you think about this being an agricultural state, you got to figure out a way to make that a reality. The second thing is how, you know, people are interested in marketing and, you know, how you're getting the word out. So I guess there's a sense of pride in knowing that you're here and the work that you're doing. And then the last thing is, are you hiring? Are there any hiring opportunities?
Yeah, we're interviewing. We're in the throes of raising more capital, but we are interviewing people in anticipation of additional funding. We're generating revenue. We've been fortunate that we received, you know, over $1 million in grant funding. One of the more interesting projects, I'll just mention this for anybody out there interested in sorghum. So we have a project with the U.S. Department of Energy and specifically Clemson University within that program, some program called Terra. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. Department of Energy is interested in increasing crop yields for biomass and ethanol production. And so think of sorghum. And so we have developed the platform to the extent that one can, there's a field in Florence, South Carolina, that has 10-acre field that has 100 varieties, over hundreds of varieties of sorghum. And if you look on our website or on our LinkedIn, you'll see the page, you'll see the cameras going through sorghum fields. And what we're looking for is the super sorghum. So each of the different types of varieties has a different genetic makeup developed by geneticists at Clemson. And then we're looking for what's called the phenotype, or the genetic, the physical expression of those genetic markers, and ideally trying to find the perfect form of sorghum. And we do that with our imaging. So this is a product that would be of interest to breeders. You know, our focus is on growers, but there's an application where breeders can use this too. But again, we've been fortunate to receive a great deal of grant money that allows us to, you know, get the company off the ground. We've raised some capital. We're raising more now.
All right. Well, this is Mark DeSantis. It's a quick peek into the work that he's doing with Bloomfield Robotics. You can hear that they're on a great trajectory and actually solving some really hard problems, which we didn't get a chance to do a little bit of a dive in when you started talking about the growth on this planet and the amount of food that is required and what that really means for the future. So maybe that's where we pick up the next time we talk to you about those issues, because I know all of us, you know, really care about that and the way, where we get our food and the demand for food and what does it mean for local, you know, consumption and farm to table, as well as, you know, what does it mean for the world?
Yeah, and I may have,
so it seems
I may have some cases of some really, really good cognac too that we got for free. So yeah.
And that would be even more amazing. But and then we want to do a deep dive into the weed industry when you want to talk about that.
I guess we'll have to do all this in person, is what you're suggesting, right? We'll have to. Yeah.
Yes, and toast to the days where we can do that in person. So everyone, that's a little peek into Mark DeSantis at Bloomfield Robotics. I know we didn't, we didn't do a complete service to understand who Mark is, the man, but you understand the work that he's done and the span that he has, and that he is a serial entrepreneur as well as an academic, and he's also a policy wonk. So Mark DeSantis, thank you so much for taking the time with us. Stay safe.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to reach out to him, you know where to find him on LinkedIn.
It's Mark at Bloomfield.ai. Mark at Bloomfield.ai.
Awesome. Mark, it's great to see your face.
Likewise.
I'm glad you're safe. Thank you.
Thanks
for everything.
again. See you all.
Thanks.
Bye.